Hey everyone, welcome to my first IG Live. So we're doing an IG Live today, Instagram Live for our newsletter, The Word. The Word is a weekly newsletter we send out, and we give everyone like a new word that we think will be empowering and helpful. And we found that like this newsletter, it's kind of popular, and people are now looking to discuss the words a bit more. And so what we want to do is provide an opportunity once a week after you get the newsletter to have a chance to talk about the words. And so this is the live Q&A discussion about the word. And the word for this week, it's a pretty important word for us. It's preracial. And I'll give like it means how it sounds. It means like before race. And it's really important for our work at SCL because we focus on culture. And for me, culture precedes race. If you look at our other words, if we look at the other words of SCL, we focus on like ethnocide and evtopia and this is just such an interesting process talking on IG Live about my stuff, about SCL's work. But pre-racial, it is emphasizing the culture that precedes race. And this is a very big idea for America because so much of our society is based around race, and our racial definitions derive from our ethnocidal divisions. And ethnocide, and so actually on this IG Live, I'm going to have to talk about a decent amount of our words. So with ethnocide, ethnocide means the destruction of culture while keeping the people. And we use it at SCL to talk about the transatlantic slave trade. And clearly there's other manifestations of ethnocide around the world and throughout time. But if you look at it through the transatlantic slave trade, it becomes really clear that it becomes really clear that the process of the transatlantic slave trade was to destroy the culture of African people and keep the physical bodies, which is what ethnocide is. You destroy the culture and keep the people. And in this cultural destruction that was occurring, European colonizers, defined African people via notions of race that they created. And so now, as we live in a world that's been defined by these divisive racial ethnocidal dividers, if we want to start thinking about more equitable and empowering ways to think and live, we have to start coming up with the words and the concepts and the philosophies to articulate and describe that. And so thinking in a pre-racial way, which is kind of like before ethnocide, is a really important way to view things. And so like the word ethnocide via our focus on culture, that kind of, it's a continuation of thinking before race and focusing on culture. And then the progress we would like to make regarding like creating evtopian spaces, that is a cultural focus, which would also be pre-racial. The word that we had 2 weeks ago in the newsletter was Fricano, and that word is also pre-racial. Fricano, it focuses on the culture of African people and the culture that was stripped away via ethnocide, but also the new culture that African people had to create in the Americas as they try to survive within ethnocidal oppression. The focus of that word is on the culture of the people, the new culture that they had to create, and the culture that was taken away. And so we focus on thinking prior to these dividers, these racial dividers, and we think it's just a very impactful way to see things. And so the newsletter that we had this week talks about that. And so to prevent me from just kind of rambling about it, I'll read an excerpt. And if you are interested in the newsletter and our work, you can always go to our website and subscribe to it. It's called The Word. It's on the homepage. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and you can get it sent to you every week. And ideally, it'll create an opportunity for people to get something enlightening sent to their inbox every Sunday, opposed to the clutter we get in our inboxes all the time. And so that's our goal with the newsletter. And let me read a little bit from this week's newsletter. So let's see, what's a good excerpt? All right, I'll just start from the beginning. I will just start from the top. And so the Sustainable Culture Lab's emphasis on culture disrupts the conventional American discourse that seeks to elevate and legitimize notions of race. Racial divisions have defined America since colonization. Europeans distanced themselves from other, quote, races in America, and the separation of colonizers from people of color has been the foundation of our divided society. Regardless of whether we celebrate or denigrate the language of our normalized division, articulating our racialized language actually bestows legitimacy upon and further normalizes our systemic division. And so that last sentence is really important when we start thinking about pre-racial ideas, is that the language of America and of colonization is one that is inherently divisive and racialized. And so even if we're trying to counter racist ideas or racist language, if all we know or have been taught is racist language, well then that's all we'll be able to speak. And so if we can only speak division and we're trying to create equality and equity, we have to start injecting new words into the discourse so that we can at least start speaking what we aspire to create, instead of speaking what we hope to dismantle or hope to show is wrong. We have to get that next level of discourse that extends beyond that. And so that's one of the key components of what we do here, is we think by subtle injections of language here or there and giving people the option to look at it and think about it and incorporate it if they so choose, we can then start having a better discourse, one that's more equitable. And from that, we can create better language. We can create better actions, better structures. All the components we need to make a better environment. We have to start with the words we say and the thoughts that create those words. And so that's what we're doing. But if anybody out there has a question or something curious, and it could be something about the word pre-racial, but it could also be about any other facet of SCL, any other earlier newsletters, any kind of words that provoked thought and contemplation, because starting a new type of conversation is the first step. And we think this right here, doing an IG live is a good way. Yes, Jackie, here we go. Good question. I can define pre-racial again. So let me just read it from the newsletter. So the definition is before race. And then to extend that, it's a prioritization of the culture and existence that precedes racial divisions and classifications. And so to elaborate on that a little bit more, we all, in America, we live in a society that is governed and viewed via a racialized lens. And so these racial divisions that we know as normal and ever present, they were created via a cultural structure that preceded it. And we at SCL, we view that cultural structure, we call that ethnocide, which is the destruction of culture while keeping the people. And so to start moving into less divisive and more equitable space, we have to adjust our minds to think about an environment that preceded our normalized racial divisions. And pre-racial is the way that we kind of incline people to think. All of us at SCL think, view this. And so by looking before race, you get to focus on the culture of the people. And this is actually quite empowering. So, a very simple example could be that at an individual level, the food you eat is part of your personal culture. So, like, I have friends who decided to become vegetarian or vegan or whatever, and that was like a cultural shift that they, based on knowledge and wanting to be healthy and sustainable, they created that and they cultivated that. And so culture has fluidity. It's something that you can change. You can be empowering yourself. But race is a notion that's very stagnant. Like you have a racial stamp that's immutable throughout your lifetime. And this makes it harder for people to want to become the solution or make changes if they're being defined by something that you can't change. And so by having a pre-racial perspective, having conversations pertaining to culture and the culture that preceded race, you now can empower people to make the changes and to form alliances and community in the ways that we really need for things to progress how they should. And so this is that's a further explanation of the word pre-racial. And let's see, that's another way to look at it. Okay, so another excerpt from this week's newsletter. And if you don't subscribe, please go to our website and subscribe. You can read this week's newsletter and all the previous ones, but you can clearly, once you subscribe, you can get them sent to your inbox every Sunday at 11 a.m. And so I'll read another quick excerpt. So to understand pre-racial, you first need to understand ethnocide. So via ethnocide, European colonizers extracted and destroyed African culture, but kept African bodies in order to create a chattel slavery. Thanks for subscribing. A chattel slavery system in the Americas. The racial division of white and black was how European, or soon-to-be white Americans, decided to sustain ethnocidal division. So racial mixing, therefore, needed to be outlawed because it would have been nearly impossible to distinguish the oppressor from the oppressed. And so our notions of race in the U.S. derive from an ethnocidal culture, a culture based around destroying culture. So if we want to create culture and not have exploitative, divisive relationships, we have to linguistically liberate ourselves from this racially divisive language. And some people view that as like going post-racial or being like anti-racist, but I think that being post or anti-racist puts too much of an emphasis on race. It legitimizes race more than it needs to be legitimized. And so instead, we just go before that concept really took root in our society and focus on the things that precede race, not the things that come after race. And that's our perspective on this. And so if anyone's curious or has any thoughts or questions, feel free. Yes, exactly. So it is, yes, wordsmiths. It's a good point. So it's thinking beyond racial constructs, but it's not funny, but it's kind of like by thinking beyond, you think before, which sounds nonsensical, but if you are thinking beyond something or moving beyond it, you're anchoring that as like a starting point. And clearly race is the starting point here. But my concern with being post-racial or going beyond it, beyond something, is that you're putting too much legitimacy in that idea. And that attachment to and just a bad idea could impede the ideas that you come up with as the solutions or what beyond looks like. You'll be too attached to something that's unhealthy. And so instead, I think going before it is something that would incline you to have less of an attachment to racial constructs. The goal can be quite the same, but the process, I think, being pre-racial as opposed to post-racial, could lead to better outcomes, especially in the US. The conversation about being post-racial is very much one where the races stay the same, but there isn't tension. And that is just not an applicable concept. Because even amongst communities where there isn't a racial difference, there's always going to be some sort of tension. And if race is always this divisive idea that empowers people to stigmatize other people or create false narratives about the groups and really dehumanize other people, then that tension will always get heightened if we expect that the race stays the same. And that's just inherently problematic. And I think it also, the post-racial feeds into a narrative that I think white America really, really embraces, where we just don't talk about it or think about it. And that clearly is going to be more beneficial to communities of color. Let's see, another question. No, that makes sense. Thinking beyond is a preventable measure too. So we're stemming the problem before it gets bigger. Exactly. Like it's preventive essentially. Like we know that this is a problematic construct. So let's make sure we work to not legitimize that construct, and we worked to go before it and then create something completely new. And so that's our goal with Preracial. And you'll see if you further analyze the words that we have tried to introduce, or that we have introduced, they all have a pre-racial idea. And so the other day I was talking to an Asian American, and I believe we're talking about the word ethnocide, and she asked me if using the word ethnocide is something that I feel is should extend outside the African American community. And I told her, of course, 100%. And I elaborated that if I create a word that only has legitimacy when a certain group of people say it, then I really haven't introduced a word. I've just introduced power dynamics, where I'm saying that this word doesn't matter. The people that say it matter more than another group of people that say it, and that's just divisive. But we live in a society that has that division at its core, that the assumption is always that that's how people approach almost anything. And that is due to a racialized construct. So the words that we bring out are pre-racial, where the goal is for everybody to be able to say it, that the words have legitimacy regardless of what your race is. It's, how they impact your life could be different because of the racial divisions in our society, but the meaning of the word is the same. And we are able to think like that and push these ideas because we think in a pre-racial way. And it just makes me quite happy. And at a personal level, it's really kind of surreal for me, because this is just how my brain thinks. This isn't me trying to think of something incredible. It's just, this is how I've thought and seen the world. Now let me make sure I articulate it and be quite precise so that it's easy for other people to see stuff how I see things, and to have that manifest that people of various ethnic or racial backgrounds seem to enjoy the words that I introduce in the work that we do. It's really, it just feels good. And that's all due to seeing stuff in a pre-racial way. But yeah, so that's so I'm here to talk about any kind of thoughts, ideas pertaining to the word. If anybody else has any questions, feel free. Yep, let's do that. I believe it's Jackie. Let's see. Hey, Jackie.
Hey, Barrett.
How's it
So
going?
it's going well. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks.
So I have two questions for you.
All right.
Um, so how do we be pre-racial without invalidating the experiences of people of color in the U.S.? And
Perfect.
and the second question is, does this mean that when people say I don't see color or I don't see race, does this mean that they're correct?
Okay, so say those are good questions. So what I'm going to need you to do is say the first one again, because I'm going to go and answer that, and I might need you to chime in to say the second one again, so that I like actively remember and answer them fully.
Okay, so I'll say the first question again.
Yeah,
Um, how do we be pre-racial without invalidating the experiences of people of color in the United States?
perfect. Okay. Um, so So the question is like there's no notion of invalidating experiences of anybody in a society. I think one key thing for the US is that the narrative of immigrating and assimilating into the US the the is one of trying to invalidate people's experiences so that they can then get the opportunity to like consume and buy enough stuff in the US where they get to become like important people. Like if so America's ethnocidal society is one that inclines people to like invalidate their own culture in pursuit of like monetary wealth and consumption. So with pre-racial, when you when people come to the US, they come to America with their culture. They don't, we stamp like a racial identity here. And what ends up happening a lot is people from all across the world come here, they get categorized as African American or Asian American or Latino, and they have a very distinct culture that is more than just that label. And the struggle is often giving them the space to share that culture and articulate the diversity of the big homogenous monolith that America has placed them in. And so with pre-racial, the goal is to focus on the cultures of the people within these racialized groups to empower them even more and also commence the conversation that if we're in this society that proclaims to be a melting pot or wants people to combine their talents, well, we also are going to start combining culture and creating new and types of culture that is unique to like America geographically. And so I think pre-racial, it's not it's the inverse. It wouldn't invalidate people's culture or experiences, but give people an extra platform to talk about the uniqueness of the culture that they brought with them to America, but also the culture that they've been cultivating in the United States. And I think, clearly since we talk about it with race, uh, that's a component of how we would linguistically say it, but to kind of get out of that linguistic impediment, you give them the opportunity to and encourage the opportunity to talk more fully about their culture and their cultural experiences in the United States. And so I guess that's how I would um, answer that question. I hope that answered that. And There was a second question. You can just type it, Jackie, but I think if there's still questions, if I could answer that one, if there's anything I left out on that one, please let me know. But otherwise, I would like to try to answer the next question. Um, I got it's a thing. Okay, I was talking to myself and forgetting I was on camera there. Oh, there we go. It's in the question request. Perfect. Let's see. Okay, does this mean that when people say I don't see color, they don't see race? So, yeah, this whole idea of people saying that they don't see that they're correct. So it's it's just like a crazy idea. So the notion of not seeing color is just crazy because we all see the color that people are, but like we have this notion of race being that someone's color is what identifies them entirely. And also like America has a an underlying narrative that the colors that aren't white are problematic. Therefore, if someone says that they don't see color, they're actually saying that they don't see your color that's not white. But like, white people really expect that their color is going to get seen, and that's it's not problematic if someone perceives them as white. But for other people that aren't white, the idea of their color not being seen as being a complimentary thing is just this crazy narrative that America projects, which is just inherently just racist. It's just a racialized, you know, intentionally, unintentionally racist idea that if your skin color isn't white, then that's problematic, and therefore somebody would compliment you or view equality as not seeing you for what you actually look like. And also it reduces people to just being a color and not a culture. Like when I see someone, clearly you'll see, and this is actually really interesting. So like with regards to, I think the Asian American community provides a really interesting example for this because you see someone, they're clear, obviously they're Asian, but you can't ask where are you from because that's implying some sort of like they're not American or they're not this or that ever. And like that's just very that question isn't a bad question linguistically, but it's a bad question in America because it implies something problematic about someone. So like it makes sense why that question is so like just bad and you just don't do it. But that's also because no one likes to be reduced to just this culturalist complexion that Americans aren't looking upon favorably. But like for me, like Asia's this gigantic continent with so many people in so many cultures that I am just like fascinated when I talk to an Asian person because I'm just curious about the depth and expanse of the culture that they have that preceded America. And I really actually do want to know all of this stuff. I'm just super curious. But that is, but that's because I see them as an extension of a culture, just like I see everybody else as an extension of a culture and not as a reduction, like a racial reduction, where you kind of like dehumanize someone to just how they appear physically and not all of the nuances and history that has come together to make someone who they are today. And so the notion of not seeing color or not seeing race, it's just it's just a very weird question in the US. And it also like if you think about ethnocide and America's an ethnocidal place, it's a place that has decided to live not from creating culture, but exploiting the culture of other people. And so when Americans say the idea that they don't see race, then the question really has to be like, so what do you see? Because if we don't have a society that cultivates culture, well, they're not trying to see culture. They're just trying to say that they don't see you as a person that they intend on oppressing. And that's just such a problematic statement. And so, um, no, I think it's I hope that answered the question. Jackie, if there's any, if I didn't answer those two questions, please let me know. Put it in the comment or something. Um, but yeah, it's just the idea of just not seeing what someone physically looks like is just the weirdest idea. Like I see, like my friend Kurth is on here, and I see like the idea of not seeing uh, Kurth as not noticing that he has an accent and asking like, oh, what part of like, yeah, I notice a subtle accent here. What part of the Caribbean are you from? And now from asking that question, you then get to find out all about the culture and the stuff that like shape and like influenced my friend. It's like I just don't know why you'd only wouldn't want to see that if you are inclined to look down on people. And I just can't really imagine why you would want to live a life where you try to look down on people first and then remind them that you've decided to not look down on them and they should say thank you. Like, that's just so crazy. Um, but but yeah, so that's that. If anybody has any other questions about the newsletter, pre-racial SEO, please let me know, and um, well, I'll keep on chatting. This is my first Instagram live. I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. You kind of just hang out and chat with people if you want. Maybe I'll play music or something. Um, but but yeah. Oh, okay. Let's see. Question. So you're saying that even with a pre-racial lens, when people say I don't see color or I don't see race, that's actually a racialized comment. Yeah, it's 100%. It's yes, it's 100% a racialized comment because I just don't know why you wouldn't want to see all the facets of the person you're looking at. Like why would it be a good comment to tell someone that you don't see a key part of who they are? Like if someone looked at me and told me that they didn't see me as a black person or they didn't see my race, like I don't know why that would be good. Like unless but the reason somebody would want to say that is because they are viewing who I am or my race as inherently problematic, or they feel as though it's not equal or they can't treat me fairly. It's just admitting to a racist vision without really knowing it. And it's just racialized language at its foundation. And so when we talk about having a pre-racial perspective, that's that's the perspective that's an example of how when you don't have a pre-racial perspective, when you have a racialized language, even when you try to say something complimentary, it's going to be insulting because racism is like the foundation of what you're saying. So, so yeah, like people should want to see someone's color. They should want to see their culture. They should want to see who they are and where they're from. They should just make sure that when they see that, they're viewing that person as fairly and equally and justly as they would anybody and not prioritizing one race or one culture ahead of another. Like it's just and implying that you need to not see a core feature of another person to then view them fairly is just very problematic. Uh, Two questions in here. Oh, okay. Let's see. Da da da. Okay, let's see. Go 3 minutes ago. Let me look what this is. This is a question I got from someone. Now it's preracial. Oh, hold on a second. How do I get the whole thing? All right. Preracial seems to legitimize race too because it implies. How do I see the whole thing? I don't know how to do it. All right. So it says that it seems to legitimize race too. Well, I would say that it doesn't legitimize race. It legitimizes that we live in a place that is defined by race, but it doesn't legitimize that we need to continue with that process. It encourages us to create something that was better than what has already been created. But you can't entirely erase the tribulations of what or the wrongs of your society from history or from memory if you're trying to make something better. Like it's a cautionary tale, and so uh, you can't. Uh, okay, here you go. Pre-racial seems to legitimize race too because it implies that we have to go back to the past to achieve peace and oh, I like this convivialness instead of growing out of our current state. Oh, okay. So this is a great question. So I'd say, all right. So I'm going to get quickly philosophical here, but in westernized thought, there's an idea that looking forward is how you progress, that you just keep on moving forward, and that's how things get better. But around 1800s, French Revolution time, when Europeans wanted to make progress, they looked to the past. They looked to the ideas that preceded the bad ideas that had governed their current society. Like, for example, under monarchies, people weren't citizens of a country, they were subjects of a king. When people wanted to free themselves from being subjects, they had to come up with a new concept of what they could be, how they could live in the world. So they're like, we're going to bring back the notion of being a citizen. We're also going to bring back the notion of being a democracy. They had to look at the world before the horrible structures that were created, and then they built that world based off of the better ideas that preceded the current bad ideas. They didn't look at the bad ideas and say, how do we build upon these to make a better tomorrow? They said, no, 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 we're going to look at the better ideas that were in the past, and we're going to use those better ideas to build a better present. And so, with a pre-racial perspective, that's the same demand. Like, we know that the racialized constructs that we have in our society today came from nightmarish transatlantic slave trade, uh, colonialism, genocide of indigenous people, that I don't think people should be inclined to say we need to build upon that to be better. We don't. Do we need to build upon these negative identifiers that people have stamped on us to then become our best selves? We can actually look at concepts of existence that preceded these bad ideas and use that to build a better present. And so, and historically, people have been doing that throughout the history of the world when it comes. So, like, in many ways, looking to the past to provide new perspectives and solve issues of the present has been very regular throughout history. Likewise, people thinking that progress comes from only looking forward and not looking at the past has frequently been a very destructive, albeit commonly thought approach. So yeah, so yeah. I don't think it legitimizes race, and you have to go back con, conceptually, philosophically, to then create present structures that can make the change. I hope that answered that question. Let me see. There's another one. Let's see. I don't know why it doesn't show the whole thing. Another question. What is the difference? All right, let's see. Here we go. What is the difference of pre-race and no race? Oh, it's a great question. Um, so I guess you could say with no race, it's a really good question. I think you could. Right now, we live in a society that's heavily structured on race, and you could say that we don't want to have any racial identities, and I don't disagree with that. Now, to be non-racial, I think that the outcome would be the same, to be honest. And they might be concepts that are interchangeable, to be honest with you. Um, yeah, I think the key thing, if with both of them, is if you're being pre-racial or non-racial, the focus should be on the shared culture that you create. Um, and you know, and that's really it. But at the end of the day, I think they're pretty. Uh, the end result would be quite similar. The application of how you see the world and how you um, might also be quite similar. So they might be pretty interchangeable ideas. That's a really good question, to be honest. Um, yeah, I like that question quite a bit. It's a very good one, and I'll also say like it's funny because I've never been a person that really prioritized race to govern like how I interact with people. And so like it so conceptually I would say I'm very like non-racial. I do understand how race shapes the lives of people in the US, and I think the sensitivity that I have to people's attachment to the racial identity that they have in America probably makes me linguistically not want to completely negate that at an emotional level. I think emotionally, if someone has an attachment to this negative concept and you're trying to form bonds and connect with them, negating that attachment right off the bat might be problematic. And so encouraging them to understand that this is their racial identity, not negating it initially, and then saying, now let's take a step before to give a new perspective and see where that how that feels, the comfort level, because in many ways we like to view stuff in an intellectual way, but the emotional journey is important. And so I think that might be the only difference between like being pre-racial or non-racial. Um, and I will say also maybe as an African American, since our identity has been racialized, talking or thinking within my community about it, about the being pre-racial works quite well for us. I'd say if are an immigrant and your life has never really been defined by race until you came to the US, the notion of just like negating this construct entirely makes a lot of sense too. And so they're very similar ideas, and I think they both could have very similar outcomes. Um, and so yeah, so that's that. I hope this was informative. I really enjoyed chatting with everybody. So thanks for tuning in and subscribe to the newsletter. And I'll see you guys next week. Thanks.